Recently it was my privilege to present to a select group gathered under the direction of Professor Bowman of the University of Denver a monologue relating to the now popular subject known to the American people as the flying saucers. This talk was made subject to a certain specified requirement as to non-publicity, both as to the public identification of the speaker and any inquiry by the audience as to dates, names, or places. Unfortunately, the subject matter of the talk was given to both press and radio within an hour after the invited guest speaker had left the classroom, after an ovation and an outburst of questions by both students and professors. Since that day, the witch hunt has been on, mastheaded by that once notorious but now most honored newspaper, the Denver Post. The greatest story since the forerunners of man came down from the trees somewhere along the flanks of the newly born Himalaya Mountains had broken, and the teller of the tale had silently gone his uncharted way. 8 days later, when from the morgue of this same famed daily a sport picture was declared by a few persons to resemble the unknown speaker, the sky over Farmington, New Mexico was suddenly ablaze with flying saucers. The entire population of almost 5,000 people of that northern New Mexico town were reported to have stood in the streets for nearly an hour and watched the flying saucers as they darted across the sunlit sky in atmosphere so clear that at 50,000 feet they were plainly visible to the naked eye. During this great outburst of flying saucers, one reported by the spectators to be the leader flew down to within a reported height of not over 1,000 feet above the amazed onlookers, and it was reported to be a great red flying saucers, while all of the rest were referred to as being aluminum colored. The strangest thing about this visitation of ships from another unknown place in this universe was that not a single person of all that great multitude thought to attempt to photograph the saucers that wheeled and flew and darted and dashed hither and yon through that noonday sky. In the course of the remarks made by the speaker at Denver University, the locale where the first flying saucer was reported to have landed was given as being within 500 miles of the University of Denver. It is fitting to note that on that great day at Farmington, that the saucers that fill the sky actually flew over the landing place of the first of the flying saucers that landed on this planet and referred to by the speaker that memorable day. It almost seemed that these flying saucers, led by their big red leader, had come back for the express purpose of proving to the watching multitude below that where one had failed, a dozen could fly the skies, coming from no man knoweth where, and returning to where no man knoweth not. One thing seemed certain: they had sailed across a sea whose shores no eyes have ever seen, whose depth no instruments have ever fathomed, whose waters no scientist has ever analyzed. They flew in and sailed across the sky, known as the Sea of Space. Hundreds of millions of stars are visible to the powerful eyes of astronomy out across this great uncharted sea. Light consumes perhaps as much as 100,000 years in traveling along the equator of the disk that harbors these 100 millions of stars visible to the astronomer's eye. Light which moves at the speed of more than 186,200 miles in a second and can circle the earth 7 times during one beat of the human pulse. Man on this planet should not be so vain as to think that when our sun is but one among hundreds of millions, that there cannot be any other planet, even in our solar system, that cannot be inhabited by human beings similar to those on this planet, or even with greater minds and greater imaginations than any yet to live on this earth. No modern scientist doubts that all the planets in our solar system, all the moons, the asteroids, the meteors, and comets were born of the sun. The blood relationship of Earth and Sun has been proved by the spectroscope. Therefore, since the composition of the Sun is now known to be very similar to that of the Earth, there is no reason why the composition of other planets cannot be assumed to be the same. We already know that more than 40 elements known upon the earth are present in the sun. Some of the scientists who have devoted considerable time to the study of flying saucers during the past 2 years have already concluded that it is possible that they have flown here from the planet Venus. And regardless of the fact that the prying eyes of science have so far been unable to look behind the cloud curtain that shrouds that planet, it is not unreasonable to conclude or think that that planet can support human habitation. It is not the current mission of this speaker to delve in to the problem of living things, their origin on either this planet or the planet Venus. If life exists there, for example, it unquestionably came as a natural result of favorable conditions. It possibly spent a long struggle in the slime, climbing slowly to the heights. The creation of life there may be the same as that here, and the destruction of it may be the same daily tragedy. For certain it is that that which animates us is held by a fragile thread, and there is no reason to assume that it is any different on the planet Venus. A great many astronomers believe that the probabilities of duplications of the conditions that made life possible on this earth being present on some other celestial body is not very great. That, however, does not concern us in this study. Certainty in the sideshow of the cosmic circus, we're all creatures of chance. For chance built the show house and modeled the actors, and someday may destroy all. All science agrees on one point, and that is that nothing in nature is stationary. So we shall not concern ourselves further with whether or not life exists on Venus or some other planet, as it does here. We shall pass on to the study and further research into the findings that have enabled us to conclude how these ships of the air sailing into our ken from out of space arrive here and return from whence they came. I am not going to concern myself with that mysterious group hidden away somewhere in the caverns of the Pentagon in Washington, who identify themselves as Project Saucer, now disbanded, and who issue statements to the press unidentified by any individual name to the effect that the flying saucers of today are hoaxes and figments of the imagination of the American people who pay their taxes, that these men may claim that they are ignorant and blind as to what they see. Let them pull the visors of their brass hats over their eyes as they choose, so that they cannot look into the skies above them as others can do, with their lips sealed as to the truth of what they already know. As for me, I am going to speak my piece and let the chips fall where they will. I want it clearly understood that I am not going to take up my time or yours in attempting to sell the idea of flying saucers to the American people. I am only concerned with one thing, and that is what scientific inquiry has revealed to me with respect to the mechanics of motion, dealing with the propulsion of these unknown creatures of the sky. I know the background of the men with whom I have been identified, who qualify in the world of science as tops in their particular field, and that is the field of magnetic research. I am certain that time will yield the truth about the people that fly these saucers of the sky. I am certain that in time we shall know from whence they come. I am certain that the sun and her children will continue to swing through space and time, while man on this planet will likewise continue to wrestle with his problems. It is my mission to give to you here further information regarding the phase dealing with the method of propulsion of the flying saucers that is of interest to me and my associates. I stated the other day that William Gilbert, 350 years ago, was referred to as the father of magnetism. I did not mention that more than 2,000 years had passed since Thales of Miletus had discovered the phenomena of frictional electricity and magnetism. Throughout the Middle Ages, the fables of magic and witchcraft were linked, and people were retarded from delving into the question of magnetism. Our own Benjamin Franklin has been referred to as the patron saint of the electrical scientists. I only wish that he had been referred to as the patron saint of magnetism, for without magnetism there could not be any electricity. The spectroscope shows that there is an enormous magnetic field around the sun, and it is the present conclusion of the best magnetic minds of science that magnetic lines of force from the sun envelop this earth and extend to the moon, and that everything, no matter what its form, on this planet exists by reason of magnetic lines of force insofar as its current form as matter is concerned. We do not understand certain forms of matter referred to as being non-magnetic by themselves, but when placed together in combination becomes strongly magnetic. For example, 61% copper, 24% manganese, and 15% aluminum, all practically non-magnetic separately, but strongly magnetic when combined as an alloy of these three component metals. It is common to refer to electric current as passing through a wire, but we already know that there are magnetic lines of force surrounding every wire through which an electric current is referred to as passing through. It is impossible to study electricity without realizing and recognizing the close connection between magnetism and electricity. The two go hand in hand. In times to come, no doubt, the present will be known as the electrical age. For year by year, electricity is playing an increasingly important part in our lives, increasing the amenities of modern civilization. But it will likewise be known as the magnetic age, because the two are inseparable. The more we learn about magnetism, the greater the opportunity we have for an understanding of the source of electrical energy, which was given a great impetus at the beginning of the present century by the development of the electronic theory of matter. The simplest of all mechanical motions is that of rotation, and whenever we utilize magnetic lines of force in cutting across the loop of the coils so as to cut the lines of force at right angles to their flow, we have the dynamo in its simplest form. And the current then picked up from the rotating coil becomes electricity as we know it. When referring to magnetic fields and lines of force, we must recognize that at all points about a magnet, a compass needle is affected by magnetic forces. This means that a magnet is surrounded by a region in which there is magnetic force everywhere. Such a region is called a magnetic field of force. I have already referred to the fact that there are 1,252 lines of force to the square centimeter, and no two lines of force ever cross. Referring to magnets themselves as we know them, every magnet, regardless of its size, when broken up, reforms itself into additional magnets. And no matter if the magnet could be cut into pieces as small as those of an atom, we would still have a magnet with a north and south pole. It is the opinion of this speaker that flying saucers flying over this land are doing research work as to our magnetic conditions on this earth. We shall now refer to what is called the isogenic or magnetic map of the United States. The isogenics are lines of equal declination. The isoclinics are lines of equal dip. An isoclinic is a line connecting points on the Earth's surface that have equal dip angles. Maps are available that show the light lines or isoclinics for the United States. The dip in the United States increases toward the north from about 55 degrees at the south end of Texas to 75 degrees at points on a line through Maine to Montana. At a point in Boothia Peninsula north of Hudson Bay and about 20 degrees from the Earth's north geographic pole, the dip becomes 90 degrees. A dip needle there stands vertically, that is, the north pole down. This is the Earth's north so-called magnetic poles. At the south magnetic pole, about 18 degrees from the south geographic pole, a dip needle again stands vertically, but the north pole points upward. The magnetic equator is an imaginary line through points on the Earth's surface where the angle of inclination equals 0, that is, where the lines of force are horizontal. Since the magnetic and geographic poles are not coincident, neither are the magnetic and geographic equators. One may think of the geographic equator as a great circle drawn about the Earth, halfway between the geographic poles. The magnetic equator is not just halfway between the magnetic poles. One reason for this is that our imaginary Earth magnet does not extend through the center of the Earth. A straight line connecting the north and south magnetic poles would miss the Earth's center by some 800 miles. A compass needle usually is pivoted so that it can swing in a horizontal plane only. Consequently, it is only the horizontal component of the Earth's magnetic field that has anything to do with the needle's orientation. At the poles, where the dip is 90 degrees, the horizontal component is 0. At the magnetic poles, then, there is no tendency for a compass needle to point in any particular direction. Therefore, we find a proper explanation for what we call the aurora borealis. That is, we have magnetic lines of force that are crossing one another at or near the geographic and the magnetic poles, and as a result we see the beautiful colored lights that light up the sky as a result thereof. At the magnetic poles, then, there is no tendency for a compass needle to point in any particular direction. The directive force on a needle is greatest at the magnetic equator, where the dip angle equals 0 and the horizontal component is a maximum. The angle of declination at a point is the angle between geographic north and south and the direction taken by a compass needle at the point. In other words, it is the deviation of the compass needle from geographic north and south. An isogenic is an imaginary line connecting points on the Earth's surface having the same magnetic declination. Agonic is an imaginary line connecting all points on the Earth's surface where the declination is zero. Referring for a moment to the aurora borealis, it must be understood that what causes the magnetic lines of force to cross in the area of the magnetic poles is the fact of the change in the magnetic field of the Earth. We have evidence of these changes. We attribute them to the changes in the magnetic field on the sun, usually referred to as being caused by sunspots. The disturbance sometimes is so great that even all of our electrical systems, our telephones, our radios, our telegraph lines, and communications by means of these are affected. The more we delve into the question of magnetic propulsion as to flying saucers, the more we become convinced that this method of transportation or travel has been developed by these people from this unknown planet and have reached a high point of excellence due to the fact that they're able to travel from one planet to another. Assuming that these ships are traveling from the planet Venus, a distance of approximately 161 million miles, we pause when we think of that terrific distance. But it must not be forgotten that once outside of the atmospheric pressure conditions of the planet, we move then into space where there is no weight, where there is no resistance, where there is only left magnetic lines of force. And since circular motion is one of the most ideal of all aerodynamic methods of travel, as proven over and over again, we're not surprised at the saucer-like shape of these ships of the air called flying saucers. Actually, there is no thrust in regard to these saucers, nor is there any needed, because what actually happens is that the ship, once in motion, crawls forward at whatever speed is desired on magnetic lines of force. In other words, the ship is trying to get out of its own way. Having crossed one or more lines of force, we find that the ship is whirling as to its wing, which of course is circular. Therefore, it is getting away from itself, which it actually never does. Now that we have learned that these ships from another world fly magnetically, it is my opinion that our own magnetic engineers will solve the problem of magnetic flight insofar as ships made on this planet are concerned. But until that day comes, we shall have to remember that the greatest exhibition of magnetic flight that has ever happened in this universe, insofar as we know, came on the second day of the memorable day at Farmington, New Mexico, when there the sky was filled with flying saucers. The editor of the local paper selected some dozen reliable businessmen of that city, and on the second day, hoping for the return of the visitors of the previous day were amazed when suddenly at 11 a.m. in the morning the sky was again filled with these strange circular visitors from another world. These gentlemen, calm, although excited beyond anything that had ever happened to them, undertook to estimate and count the ships that swarmed the air for nearly an hour that day. And they reported that, in their judgment, there was between 400 and 500 ships that had flown into the vision of the people of that northern New Mexico town from another planet, from another world.